Good afternoon and welcome to today's Growth Through People event on re-establishing employee engagement. I'm Emily Stubbs, Policy and Projects Manager at Grace Birmingham Chambers of Commerce, and this event is part of our Growth Through People campaign, which you may have come across already so far this month. Growth Through People aims to help local firms boost productivity and grow through improved leadership and people management skills. And this year it involves 8 free digital workshops, along with thought leadership blog, video, and podcast content on the Chamber, website throughout March. The campaign will end with a virtual conference on the 30th of March, featuring a mixture of inspirational keynotes, thought-provoking panel discussions, and breakout workshops. And I'd like to thank all of our headline sponsors for their support: the University of Birmingham's Word Inclusivity Research Centre, Aston University, and BMet College. I'd also like to give a massive thank you to our speakers today for divvying up their time to deliver this session. Fiona Anderson, CIPD and Engaged Success volunteer and founder of My Change Expert, Diane Rance, partner of Work Horizons, and Saira Demmer, CEO of SF Recruitment, who will be giving a case study today. Before I hand over to Fiona to kick us off, we have 2 anonymous polls that I'd like to ask you to fill out, which might spark some ideas for today's discussions, will crucially feed into our research into leadership and people management across the region. So my colleague Sophie will be putting those on the screen now. Before I I'll mention it now and at the end of today's session. If you can also complete our post-event survey online, it would be hugely appreciated. It's not just about event feedback, but it's also contributing to our research into leadership and people management skills and our work with stakeholders on this agenda. And it will inform what Growth People looks like in the future. We hugely appreciate every single response, much as we hugely appreciate everyone who posts on social media at any point during the event or during this month using the hashtag GTP19. If you enjoy the webinar, please let us know. I hope you enjoyed the session. You take away some useful insights to implement in your own businesses. Just quickly before I hand over to Fiona, can I have Sophie reveal the results of the anonymous polling? Very interesting.
Ooh.
Fantastic. So most people think their work output has actually increased during the pandemic, as has their overall sense of personal resilience. That's fascinating and really positive to hear. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Fiona to talk to us about re-establishing employee engagement and introduce us to the enablers of employee engagement. Over to you, Fiona.
Thank you ever so much, everybody that's come. Wow, what an audience we've got. 60% improvement in productivity. So we're really looking forward to hearing what you're doing, because not only is today about us sharing about what's happening, but we really want to be able to share what great things you're doing as well. So please do get involved. Join us on chat, and we'll be inviting questions and answers as well. So chat for comments, thoughts as we go through, and Q&A to pose those questions, and we'll be asking for some input later on through the questions as well. So welcome everybody, and thank you to my 2 colleagues, Saira and Diane, for this afternoon. First slide, please. So what are we going to be going through? Well, what is employee engagement? It actually can be quite difficult to find a definition, so we'll explore that. We really want to share some examples with you of what it means, and Sarah's going to be doing a great insights into what she's been doing recently. We're going to give time for reflection, and we really want to create that link with productivity. It's so important, and to hear that you're 60% of the people that are here with us this afternoon feel they've increased their productivity is phenomenal. The employers will be after you, I can assure you. So let's have a look then at employee engagement as a definition. Next slide, please. Thank you. What do we mean by employee engagement? Well, lots of words on this page. I'll let you have a read through, and there's the references as well. But what we really mean is it's an energy. It's what we feel, it's what we experience when we walk into businesses. Those were the days, weren't they? When we'd have met prior to this session and had a lovely coffee with each other and found out what was happening. But it's people who go above and beyond what's expected of them. They're loyal, and they're committed to your business, and they create that loyalty and commitment with your customers. So really important in terms of what employee engagement is. Employee engagement creates that employee experience that creates your customer experience. So if you've got really engaged employees, then guess what? You'll be building great loyalty with your customers as well. So next slide, please. Let's have a think about before COVID. This is BC now, it's being referred to, before COVID. And re-engagement, I did smile when we were asked to come and present on the topic of re-engagement, because the reality is that the UK was not very engaged, even when things were good. So only 11% of our workforce were engaged. 21%, that's 1/5, 1 in every 5 people actively disengaged. And the remaining 68% feel no meaningful attachment to their job and to the company. That's big. And actively disengaged, they're people who often puff, who are late, who really affect and create a sort of a virus through your own business. And our productivity in the UK then was 30% lower than the USA and 35% lower than Germany. That's huge. What on earth are we doing that's not working? So I did a bit of looking into this, and the Scandinavian countries are the countries who are the best at productivity, and that's related to their quality of life. They have values important in their business, such as things as trust, balance of home and work, joy and health are company values. Gosh, I wonder how many of our businesses would have them as their company values. And they're very consciously built on those values that they have: joy, health, balance of homework. In fact, they don't work more than 40 hours a week. And they've got a much flatter autonomy, and they very much build that balance between being able to combine your position at work with your family life. They don't encourage working late. They don't encourage working weekends. So there's a lot we can be learning as we move forward, especially given the need for well-being going forward. But you can see the impact pre-COVID, that we were a booming country in terms of employment. People were being paid more, or getting paid more, as they went into jobs just before the pandemic, because there was a need for talent. Talent was lacking. And people were seeking companies where the culture was right for them. They wanted to join a company that was right for them. So that's us pre-COVID BC. What did that mean to the bottom line then? Next slide, please. So remember in the previous slide, 1 in 5, 21% disengaged. So take your annual pay bill, your annual salary bill, divide that by 1/5. And your disengagement, or your disengaged staff, would be anything between 18 and 33% of your workforce. So take your 20% of your salary bill and divide that by your percentage who aren't engaged. That gives you a bottom line impact of disengagement. It can't be ignored, especially going forward. And certainly over the years, through the generations, there's been a shift in the employee expectations, and employees are really seeking businesses that are doing good, that are solving problems of people and planet and not profiting from them. And this is evident in the way that ESG, the environment and social governance measures and criteria, are being applied, both by investors, but also for reporting as well. So some real shifts as we've gone through the years and through the generations of employees. Next slide, please. So what does that mean for the employees? Majority of employees that are in our workplace now, the paycheck's no longer that as important as my purpose. Why do I exist? And why does this company exist that I'm working for? And actually, it's not just about me being happy at work. It's me developing, it's me growing, continually growing so I can thrive. And I'm not so interested in a boss being a boss. I need somebody who's going to coach me to really develop and encourage me in my growth. No longer annual reviews, it's ongoing feedback, conversations, having that open, honest conversation about my strengths, not about weaknesses. Please build on what I'm good at and really encourage me to do even more of that. And more importantly, especially post-COVID, it's about my life and my well-being. And my well-being is covering many topics going forward. Thank you. Next slide. This is a Gallup survey, and this was across 82,000 teams with 1.8 million employees across the world. And this is what they identified were the results for those companies who operate with a higher quartile of employee engagement versus, in other words, the actively engaged, with those who've got the disengaged. So those in the upper quartile, actively engaged, majority of staff, lower quartile, where there are people actively disengaged, these are the results you can get. We're certainly going to be focusing on productivity, which can be 17% higher, imagine that. Profitability, customer ratings, less cost to absenteeism, less returns and defects. If you're in a hospital, much safer, less incidents, and health and safety incidents much more reduced. So the results are widespread across the business through employee engagement. But let's have a look at what we mean by employee engagement then. And next slide, please. These are referred to in Engage for Success, which is a volunteer movement. I'm a steering group member there. I've set up the Greater Birmingham network. So please, if you want to join it, please let us know. And also lead on people productivity, which is a national approach to how do we really get people and productivity through people in the UK. So employee engagement, the 4 enablers were identified in the McLeod report 10 years ago. And in Employee Engage for Success, we're celebrating 10th birthday this year. The strategic narrative is all about the leader and how they share their overall purpose of the company, their vision for the company, how they engage the people in what is important to the business and to their people. And through the pandemic, what we've noticed is that leaders are much more visible. They're much more accessible. They actually would be recognised by most people now. That say-do gap has reduced considerably between leaders and their staff. They're much more connected. And even more importantly, they're showing compassion, interest in their people, and they themselves are vulnerable as well. They share their vulnerabilities, are open about the difficulties that they're experiencing. The second enabler are engaging managers, and managers nowadays need to think of the whole person, the human being that is in front of them, not focusing on their weakness, helping them be better at what they're good at by helping them focus on their strengths. The employee voice, absolutely fundamental, where people are listened to, where they're heard, and returning to work, that is going to be so important. People want choice coming back. They want to be involved in that decision, what their working practices are going to look like, where they're going to be working, how much of that might be at home, how much might be in an office or place of work. And then organisational integrity. How good are we in that say-do? How good are we at delivering decisions and making decisions based on what we say we are about as a business? Are our values just pinned on the wall, or do we actually bring them to life in how we recruit and how we retain? And these are becoming more and more important to our employees going forward. They really want to tune into how it is working for us, how it is working for you, rather than, hey, give us a job. They want to know what it's going to be like for them, what's in it for them coming to you. So I'd like you to think about these 4 enablers. Sarah's about to share her great insights of what she's been doing. And I'd like to encourage you through chat to identify what she's sharing and which enabler it fits with. So Sarah, thank you. We look forward to hearing.
Great, thanks Fiona. There's a great challenge to make sure I tick off all of the enablers. I think I've got most of them, so you can test me at the end. Really interesting to hear what Fiona was saying about the pre-COVID and post-COVID world. And certainly we would recognise a lot of what she's talked about in our own business in terms of the expectations that our people have of us as a business, but also the expectations we have of ourselves of what we're giving to our people. So if I just go back slightly, a couple of years ago, I was invited to, I think it was the same forum, to talk about what mattered in engaging people. And 2 years ago, I spoke very passionately about the importance of purpose, or the strategic narrative as Fiona's described it. And in SF, a big part of our focus at that point in time was around what is the greater good that we're providing. I think it was referred to earlier as problems of people and planet. And we chose planet. We were going to be the greenest recruitment business that you had ever heard of. And why on earth did a recruitment business care about the environment? Well, that was why it was so exciting, because we had no earthly reason to make our entire brand about recycling and about single-use plastics, and yet we did it anyway. And that was incredibly exciting to people at the time. They wanted to be part of this recruitment business that was doing things differently, that was making a statement, that was part of something bigger. And whilst people still care about those issues, very quickly once the pandemic started, we saw a very noticeable shift from caring about macro issues to being much more individually focused. And of course, not in a selfish way, but almost in a primal, my world has become much smaller and I need to take care of myself and my family. I need to protect those people around me, because not only do I not see them very often, but they are my entire world today. And so that's what matters to me now. So of course, for businesses, what that means is that life becomes very different in terms of the vision that you need to lay out. You can't just pick one big statement anymore and throw your all into it. You have to create multiple individual visions for every single employee. Now, we have 50 employees, so that's a relatively manageable task. For those businesses that have thousands of employees, I don't envy them that task, because the individuals in their businesses don't care any less about what's happening in their own lives than my people do. But it's very important now to make sure that each person's being treated as an individual. So in an attempt to distill what we've spent the last 12 months really looking at to help bring that to life, I've got 5 key areas really that we focused on. And I think it's fair to say pretty much since the first day the pandemic started, my entire personal focus in how I spend my time in my job has been around focusing on my people and creating that sense of vision for them. So how have we done that? The first point has been around open communication. And when there are things to say and when there are good things to say, that's easy. We're all good at picking up the phone. We're all good at writing that email. We're all good at, sending a message in whatever our preferred form of communication is. But when there aren't things to say, or when things are difficult and when there are tough decisions to make, or when we're in week 8 of lockdown and it feels like complete drudgery and there's really very little you can say that's going to brighten anybody's day, it's very easy to shy away from that communication. And I would be very honest in saying that there have been moments when I have stared at my screen for an hour before I've thought of something to say. But I knew that it was important to say something, even if the something that I say is I have very little to tell you that is positive today, and I am really sorry for that, but this is the truth, then that's okay, because it's communication. And actually, the positive feedback that we've had just from being regularly communicated to give people that sense of certainty that we will get a communication every week from our leadership to tell us what's happening. And even if that's to tell us that nothing's happening, well, that gives me a sense of certainty in an incredibly uncertain world today. So that's been really important. The other aspect of communication for us has been this point about every individual needs a narrative around their individual world. So we've been very careful to make sure that no individual manager becomes responsible for too many people, or where we do have people that have bigger teams and are more stretched and are more likely to either miss challenges that certain team members are having or not be able to give them the due time and attention, that we then bring in extra support for that person to make sure that just because you happen to have a manager with a bigger team, your individual narrative is not being allowed to fall by the wayside. And again, it means that everybody gets that regularity of communication, gets that touch point, gets the one-to-ones. I don't think I've done even a fraction of the one-to-ones in the last 5 years of my career as I have this year. And they're only on Zoom, but it doesn't matter, because every single employee in our business has had the chance to have a quarterly catch up with me. They get to ask me anything they want. They get to tell me anything they want. And predictably, the questions they ask me are not about the business. They're about my baby, or they're about my plant that's behind me. They're always quite personal things. But as Fiona was saying, that closeness between employees and their leaders now, again, adds to that sense of comfort and uncertainty when everything else around us is uncertain, which of course helps with engagement. So point number 2, thinking about the whole person, well-being, mental health, fitness, family. I have learned more about my employees in the last year than I ever knew. I know everybody's other half's name. I know everybody's children's name. I even know some people's cats and dogs' names, not necessarily by design. But the reason for that is not just a box ticking exercise. It's because to understand how to really support and motivate someone, we have to understand what their home environment is like. You know, does this person have 5 spare rooms in their house and is never going to need to worry about finding a home office and a safe space to work? Does this person have very young kids and is really struggling to even focus for 5 minutes without being interrupted? And the list goes on. And unless we understand what those individual environments look like, you can't really respond with the right type of support package. So in this lockdown that is hopefully coming to an end soon, but with the children being at home, every single person had a conversation with me if they had children at home, to look at what kind of support or flexible working or even childcare packages we could put in place in order to understand those personal circumstances. So I think those are the things that, you know, looking at the person as a whole, really encouraging their well-being, make a real difference to people feeling like the company cares. And even if the answer sometimes is, there's nothing you can do to help me with homeschooling, but I just really appreciate that you took the time to ask, that can sometimes be enough. So also on the topic of thinking about the whole person, we've been a little militant about encouraging people to get some exercise. I have to confess I am not the best at this, so I've not been as good a role model as I probably could have been. But to encourage people to just break up their day, break up the monotony of staring at a screen, we sent everybody a company branded exercise kit, and I'm told it's quite fancy exercise kit by those who know what they're talking about. So in an attempt to encourage people to, you know, just go out, have a walk, look quite good while they're doing it. We sent all these out to everybody at home. We've launched a 6-week-long steps and exercise game where all the offices are competing against each other. There's some prizes. There's an individual league, and being a business of salespeople, of course, you don't need to prod very much to get people to get into the competitive spirit. So that's really helped just break up the day and also send the message that we don't expect you to spend every waking hour working. It's okay to go out for that walk. It's okay to go and play with your kids in the garden for, you know, half an hour if that's what you need to do to give yourself a breather. So point 3, creating a sense of community. So I just described the game that we're doing around exercise. We did a game in the run up to Christmas. So it started in October and culminated at our Christmas party, which was, we called it Selfie Spree. And everybody in the company joined a WhatsApp group, and with at a moment's notice, so not really with any warning other than we knew it was going to be on a Wednesday or a Friday, we'd get these tasks sent through, and the first 5 people to send a selfie with, for example, a coat hanger or a banana peel on their head, or making a wig from some household objects, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. It was all just a, you know, very light-hearted, a bit silly, but gave everybody an opportunity to send out these selfies, and it was very accessible. You know, everybody's, well, most people have got bananas in their home or coat hangers, so there was nothing too difficult about it. It gave everybody that window into what each other's homes look like. It gave everybody that little sense of fun. Of course, it was competitive again, which, as you can probably tell, is a recurring theme at SF. But most importantly, it gave a sense of community, and it brought everybody together when we're all sitting behind our screens doing our jobs and really losing that sense of what makes us a company and brings our culture together. And we only ever planned to run it from October until Christmas. And the reason that we launched the exercise game this year was because it was so popular. People wanted to be on WhatsApp with each other all the time to keep it going. So we came up with this new game. And, you know, I won't pretend that our sense of community is as strong as it was when we were all in the office, that there is definitely something that is lost from not physically being in an environment together. But this has been a really good step to bridging some of the gap that's been created by the pandemic. So point 4, reward and incentive. Now, yes, it's true that reward and money matters much less today than culture and purpose and how do I feel about work. However, that said, money is still a hygiene factor, and in an incredibly uncertain economic environment, it's really important that employees aren't worrying about how they're going to pay the bills. They're not worrying about whether their job's safe. They're not worrying about, you know, looking after their family. So we actually, at the beginning of the pandemic, recognized the fact that in a sales business, it is going to be harder to make money, and increased our reward program for performance-related pay. We actually tripled it. And then as the pandemic has improved and the economy's recovered, we're slowly tapering that back down. But giving people that instant hit at the beginning that said, we are going to protect you, we are going to pay you, and you are going to be fairly rewarded for the effort that's put in, it was actually really powerful. And as I'll come to at the end, the productivity increase that we got from that, you know, paid for itself multiple times over in terms of the extra reward that we gave. So it was a very important step for us to just calm the stress levels of our people. And then finally, and maybe most obviously, the 5th point is just saying thank you. It doesn't always go without saying, but this year, at the end of the year at Christmas, I felt it was appropriate to write personal Christmas cards to every single employee, highlighting some of the great things that they've done this year, what the things were that we appreciated most or where we felt they'd really gone above and beyond. Thank yous to their families as well, because as we know, home working is a family effort now, it's not just an individual effort. And whilst I must admit, I was flagging a little by the time I got to the end of writing all those Christmas cards. The response that we got in terms of just the effort that had been gone to understand people's environments, to recognise their achievements was brilliant, and you know, made it more than worth it. So where has all of that got us? We today have the very fortunate position to actually have benefited from a 30% increase in productivity compared over the last 12 months compared with the 12 months in the run-up to the start of the pandemic. So some of that is down to people saying, I don't have to waste time commuting, you know, I'll kind of get out of my pajamas and I start my work day. And there is an element of, you know, less time spent at the water cooler. But really, this is about focus. By taking away the fear through the communication, by taking away the worry and the stress through ticking the box on reward, and through all of the other things that we've done, it allows people to just focus on getting on with what they need to do without the worry and concerns about the wider economic environment. So that's just some of what we've been doing. I know there's lots of brilliant things that are going on from companies, you know, all around the country actually at the moment. But hopefully there's a little bit in there that's provided some inspiration for any of you who are looking to do more.
So absolutely fantastic examples in there. So I hope people were noticing how the managers were involved in everything, how the strategic narrative was very clear every week. And that was really, really important. But leaders who could say, I don't know, I haven't got an answer right now. But actually providing focus for that week. It was so important to people just to hear what they needed and what was expected of them during a week that everything else had gone AWOL to. And I love the idea of your WhatsApp group. I'm sure you could share that. Have you got anything on social media about what you've been doing?
We have actually. We've got a video summary of what it all looked like. So we'll share that around afterwards.
That would be great. Thanks. So Diane, any reflections in the Q&A or chat that we need to bring in at this point? Diane, you're on mute. The saying for the year.
It is absolutely, sorry about that. We've got a question from Mary J. Mary's asked, can we use a different term than engagement to avoid it being seen as a standalone activity? And I think, Sarah, what you've talked about shows that in your organisation, it absolutely is integral to all that you do, that it's not a standalone activity, that it's used by everybody. So I'm wondering, within your organisation, within SF Recruitment, do you call it engagement? Do you have a name for it? Is it just how we do things around here?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I actually don't ever use the word engagement because I see it as me doing my job. Now, I run a people business and people are my assets. So for me, it's very much just, you know, what we do around here. It's our operating model. It's my job. But I think if I was to put a term against it, I'd say it's something like, yeah, it's our operating model, it's our people approach. They're not very good terms, but I agree that it should be part and parcel of running any business, because we all know without our people, we're nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really good point, because some people think, oh, it's only HR. Actually, it's everybody's role, whatever you call it. Employee experience is one that's coming through, because that links through into the customer experience is terminology that's coming through. Your company culture, productivity, whatever you want to call it. And we're calling it all three of those today. So we're linking them together. But it's absolutely just taking that time out and stepping into the other person's shoes to understand it from their perspective. And it's definitely not a one size fits all, as you gave great examples of, Sarah. Thank you. Anything else?
We got a question. Well, I've got two questions from Elena. One question, which is, what are the key challenges you're seeing businesses struggling with as they prepare to return? So Sarah, any particular challenges that you're seeing either yourself or your client businesses struggling with as they prepare for people to return to the physical workplace?
So clients that we're talking to tend to be in two camps. There is a camp of, we've learnt to operate regardless of where our employees are. You know, they could be on the moon for all we mind, and as long as they're doing what they need to be doing, we don't really mind. But the clients in those camps, the challenge that they have is, how do you keep that connection? Because if your employees have, you know, decided that they want to work by the pool in Dubai, or they want to go and, you know, set up shop at grandma's because she's had her vaccine and we want to go and visit her, that's great, and that's really important to have that flexibility. But then you lose that connection that you have, that I think many people are really, really craving, that human coming together again. Mm-hmm. You then have the other camp of businesses that are saying, we can't wait till we're allowed to be back in. As soon as the world's open back up again, everybody back in 5 days a week, working hours are 8:30 to 5:30, we'll see you in June. And of course, you know, the leash has been let so far out now that it's very hard to recreate that level of structure around people's lives now, and they're not used to it anymore. Some people love it, some people really want to do it, but for the most part, we're seeing a real resistance against that from employees. So those two camps, I think it will remain to be seen, you know, what wins out. I suspect somewhere a middle ground in between the two is going to be the answer that most businesses end up moving to. But there are some businesses where it's very difficult to do your job remotely, particularly if you're onboarding lots of new people and you want to give them the support. Equally, you know, the more mature or experienced staff that you have, the harder it is to impose that structure and working hours now. So I think the next year is going to be very interesting just to see. I think businesses are going to need to be quite open to flexing their model. Try something. If it doesn't work, it's okay to admit that it's not quite right for the modern world, and flex that until you find something that does.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've been hearing is this kind of an evolving business model that might be, well, we'll bring people in for the innovation, for those innovation and those collaboration pieces of work and that social interaction, and actually team meetings and your own work, yeah, do that at home. Stay at home and do that. So there might be a different business model evolving. And let's face it, there's going to be an awful lot of empty offices, it would appear. And transport isn't going to go back to normal. Public transport and distancing will still remain, possibly, going forward. So it's not as though the new norm is the old norm just in a different shape. That new norm is going to take quite some time to evolve. And actually, the new norm is already there. We're working from home and we're doing well. 60% improvement in productivity, according to our audience. So we are doing well. It's how the leaders adapt that into their way of running their business going forward, and listen to and involve their people in that as it goes forward, I think. What are you hearing, Diane, in your chamber role that you do?
Well, I'm hearing from various people that one of the issues, and Saira picked up on this, is that there's a whole sort of continuum of what people want. And there's going to be an awful lot of negotiation over the next 12 months around balancing different needs of organisations, different needs of different team members, needs of different individuals in terms of their homework balance, perhaps childcare needs, whatever. So I think there's going to be a whole process of negotiation over the next 12 months, lots of little micro negotiations as well as perhaps collective ones. Fiona and I did a session last week on tricky conversations. I think the next 12 months, for a lot of managers, one of the key skills they're going to need in their sort of kit bag is how to have effective, potentially tricky conversations and how to balance that. And particularly if they're having those conversations remotely as we are today, as opposed to face, how do you manage that? So I think there's going to be an awful lot of listening, being mindful of the employee voice.
Absolutely.
And taking time to rebuild relationships where they're slightly stretched because of remote working or furlough, and re-establishing relationships in order to have really positive, healthy conversations around returning to the workplace, whatever that might look like.
And I think if we give the employee voice the opportunity to develop the solutions, wow, yes, how powerful that will be. And actually, they'll probably work. So that certainly works for family working and coming up with who does what and where and when. Let's take that into the workplace and figure out how we work together. And one of the techniques we're going to share later will be exactly that. How do we get the employee voice in to really understand what's been working well and how they can bring that back into work?
Yeah, I'm coaching a senior civil servant at the moment. One of the things he's working on is his delegation skills. And he's taken as his personal challenge for his own development is to set up a work group amongst his team for them to go away and think about what the future might look like in terms of flexible working, rather than him coming up with the plan for them. That's quite a stretch for him in a coaching situation. I'll be interested to see how he gets on with it. But he's allowing the employee voice. He's welcoming the employee voice. And then that's a really good example. Give employees the chance to come up with their own suggestions without commitment to necessarily adopt it 100%, because that might not be practical, but at least to have a voice and to feel actively listened to.
So I heard a great example last week, in fact, on our CIPD call, which was where the dinner ladies have now taken on the role of becoming the IT front line for the business itself. And they're loving it. Yeah. So, so it's about I think what I've learned, certainly in what I was doing a couple of weeks ago, we found new ways. We've had to be adaptive. Don't just suddenly cut us off and tell us we haven't got any ideas, because we've made it work. So that employee voice, I think, if it's not being listened to, will certainly there'll be a lot of disgruntled people. And when our managers and when our leaders are not listening, boy, can our staff create a great version of their own reality and waste a lot of energy creating it. But get them involved, ask them for their opinions, let them know what your expectations are for your business for the next month, the next week, maybe even a year if you're lucky, but actually get them involved in developing what those solutions are and involved in coming up with how to make that work.
Absolutely.
So on that note, have we got anything else before we move forward?
No, I think that's all the questions we've got at the moment.
So I think that feeds quite well into, we've got a couple of examples actually. Next slide, please. And this is a dear friend of mine who works for White Stuff. What were you doing with your employees on Valentine's Day? Well, look at this, that she got through the post, a Valentine's card, and all the things that are really important to her are on that card. She absolutely, my friend going into work would contribute to a homeless person who would be playing the guitar, and she'd have him on her social media promoting him, and so everything that's important to her is on that front of that card. And to get a card on Valentine's Day, and in the retail sector, I think the one that is probably going to experience one of the most difficult challenges going ahead, for them to take care and spend that time, that energy, that personalization, and those words, you mean the world to us. How fantastic is that? And I'm furloughed. So yeah, some great examples. It's not difficult to make a huge difference through these days, through these times. And then the next one, please, next slide. So for those of you who aren't really sure about your own engagement within the workplace, there is a free team diagnostic. It's been developed by Engage for Success and Ashridge Holt, based on some research that identified four zones of engagement. I'm not going to go into them, but if you want to find out more, the link is at the end on the slide deck. And this is a free of charge team diagnostic for you to find out what engagement is like within your team. And of course, the idea is the zone of engagement is the best place to be. So free of charge, and a report that actually is quite useful. I've used it within my husband's business most recently. So very easy to do. Probably takes about a month from start to finish in terms of applying for it, getting it allocated, and then getting your feedback. So allow time, don't expect it immediately in return. Thank you, Diane. Next slide, please. Over to you, Diane.
Thank you, Fiona. Emily mentioned at the beginning that I'm a director of an organisation called Work Horizons, and we focus on helping organisations get the best out of their people, and also on developing individuals and enabling them to unlock their potential and reach their ambitions. One of the things I do within the Work Horizons is I lead the Work Horizons coaching practice, and I want to today introduce you to a tool which I'm not going to go through it in enormous detail, but we are going to put a link at the very end so you can watch a video and learn a bit more about this tool. The reason why I want to introduce this tool is I think as we prepare for people to come back into the workplace, whether back into the physical workplace or back from furlough, it's useful to press the pause button and step into their shoes and think about what might have been happening for them, and how we can minimise any threats they're feeling and maximising those positive emotions that will encourage them to come back with an open heart and an open mind and with energy. So this is called the SCARF model, and it's based on the work of Dr. David Rock from the Neuro Leadership Institute. This is a tool we use in coaching quite a lot, whether with teams, but primarily with individuals. And it looks at 5 different categories that can induce, I think that's the right word, a threat or a reward response in an individual. And we're going to look shortly at how those might have changed over the last 12 months in terms of triggering emotional responses and emotional thoughts about coming back into the workplace, and what we can do to deal with those in a pragmatic and compassionate way. So the first one is around status. Status is about how we as individuals feel our position is in relation to others. So it's not necessarily a job title or a salary, but it's about how we see ourselves in relation to others. Do we feel part of a group? Do we know where we sit within an organisation? Do we have clear lines of communication? That sort of thing within the context we're talking about today. Certainty, how clear are we about what's expected of us? But also, how clear are we about the framework within which we work, the expectations of us, the rules of engagement, as it were, the behaviours of other people? And Sarah mentioned about how in their communications, they kept up a clear routine of communicating to their employees. They might not have been able to tell their employees at SF Recruitment exactly what was happening, but their employees knew with certainty that they would be communicated with regularly. And sometimes that's the only certainty we can give to people, but it gives people a sense of that certainty that makes us all feel more secure. Autonomy, how much autonomy do people have? By autonomy, we mean freedom and control over some of the decisions within their workspace, within their work life. Over the last year, some individuals will have had a lot more autonomy because they've been working from home and they've had more freedom about how they could carry out their work role. Others will have had less autonomy because their employers have felt a need to exert, certainly in the first stages, perhaps to exert higher control over the work in order to establish a new way of working. So that might have fluctuated quite a lot over the year. Relatedness, I think this is one where people will have felt a great sense of potentially of threat over the last year. Those who have not remained in the workplace and perhaps have been on furlough as well, those very important social relationships and connections we have will have been diluted, in some cases perhaps almost disappeared. And that can induce quite a strong threat response within individuals, which means they're focusing on that rather than perhaps the more positive, growth-orientated aspects of themselves, their work, their development, and their organization's purpose. And the last thing is one around fairness. People, in order to have a reward response and therefore want to engage proactively, need to feel that they're being treated fairly. And a lot of that comes down to situations and decisions being transparent, understanding, back to the 4 enablers, understanding the narrative around what's happened and seeing the fairness and logic within it, even if they don't actually like the outcome of it.
And I think when you reflect on Saira and what Saira had been doing, she was doing a lot here, wasn't she? In terms of the fairness, the relatedness, the WhatsApp group, the autonomy. Yes, I've got decisions. I can go out. I can spend time with my children when need to. I don't have to be at my computer all the time. That certainty with that clarity each week, and how they're related to each other. So really great examples in Saira's sharing based on this.
Absolutely. And Saira gave the example about the Christmas cards. In that situation, it was recognizing the importance of connections and making a positive, having a positive intent around that. Absolutely. Taking the time, putting the commitment in. And I think that relates to the status aspect of this model, which is that Saira clearly demonstrated the importance of that person in her mind and in relationship to the organization, and reaffirmed their importance within SF Recruitment.
Absolutely, some great examples there.
Absolutely. Can we have the next slide, please? So this is where we're going to look in a little more detail at the difference potentially between a furloughed worker and somebody perhaps as a key worker who's been really, really busy all through the year. So let's take someone who's perhaps in a medical setting in a hospital, and how these different attributes as well, these different factors might have played out differently through the year. And this is to make the point, as Saira did, that we're talking here about individuals. We're not talking about one size fits all. So Saira talked about how she has 50 members of staff and all have different needs and different ambitions and different, different things that are differently important to them. So not everybody has these 5 factors as equal importance. They're important in different ways, and their different importance fluctuates over time as well. So let's think about it, a furloughed worker over the last year. At times they might have felt they've forgotten. I have a member of my family who was made redundant last year, and well, 2 members of my family, and it was really significant the different way in which they were communicated with during that time. One was hardly communicated with at all. One had really good regular and personal communications. So in terms of status, one didn't feel forgotten, and one absolutely felt forgotten. And this was down to really simple management activities. So back to the enablers, engaging managers. A key worker, perhaps in a medical setting, their status has been absolutely secure, and if anything, enhanced by the public recognition of the importance of their roles. Furloughed workers' uncertainty, so much has changed, will my role exist? Sarah mentioned about the certainty of the communications, even if not the content. There'll be some staff who feel as though have felt threatened by the lack of certainty in the last year, and how their organisations and their colleagues have spoken with them, the frequency, the content will have impacted massively on whether that's a severe threat response or just a minor threat response. Whereas the key worker might feel, you know, I know exactly what was needed of me, I was exactly clear on it, I've adapted well, fine, I'm happy on the certainty factor. Others might have felt they were completely out of control. No autonomy at all, it was a whirlwind, they didn't know what was going on. Now that might have settled the last few months, but it might have gone into a whirlwind again with the lockdown beginning of January. And again, some people feel more and less comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty and losing some of their autonomy. Others are quite happy to get on with autonomous work. Different people respond in different ways. The key worker might have felt, you know what? I'll make sure the boss knows what I'm doing and how I'm adding value, but I'm quite happy with how it is. Again, relatedness. If we as organisations don't let people know clearly how to contact us, when they'll be contacted, who the key people are, particularly when it comes to returning to work, then there's likely to be more of a threat response there. We're less likely to get a threat response. We're going to get a more of a reward response and more open to change and coming back and engaging proactively. If someone feels as though they have that connection, they know who they're going to see, they know how the communication is going to work, they know how the reinduction is going to work, all those sort of things. And the fairness of the process. A colleague of mine is a HR director, a client of mine is a HR director, a large organisation. And one of the things they're dealing with is a sense of unfairness, not in terms of what the organisation's doing, but what colleagues are doing. So they had an employee who came back to work 3 times with COVID symptoms, knowing he had them. Now, ultimately, that person was dismissed, but there was a great sense of unfairness amongst the workforce, not about the organisation, but about what their colleague was doing. So that works for both those returning from furlough and those who have stayed employed all the way through. Can we have the next slide, please? Just noticing that Mary's put a comment in the chat about colleagues who are quickly moved to priority work felt forgotten by their normal teams. Absolutely. Some people were very much just uprooted from their organisation, put into a different setting, and then there was a disconnection from their normal teams because there wasn't the time to put that in place with the quick responses that were required. So we're talking today about re-engaging, and we're talking about individuals and teams. Teams will need to re-engage with each other. And this would be a useful tool. There are others probably more useful that we could introduce you to if you're interested. But there's quite a lot of team coaching that could be usefully taking place over the next few months as teams come back together physically and or remotely to sort of restate and re-explore how are we going to do this from here on in. So thinking about the individual status, individuals need to be clear about who their manager is, what role they're coming back to. There may have been role changes they're not aware of, or they may be fearful of role changes and they just don't know. So that's really important. Be clear about who they're coming back to work with, who's going to be their manager, where they can get information back. This idea of having some sort of induction, re-induction, re-onboarding, whatever you want to call it, but recognizing that as people return, we can really give a boost to them re-engaging by putting a really strong focus on that at the beginning or even before they return. Autonomy. People might have lost confidence. We need to listen. We need to listen to about what's right for people. What do they want? They may be hesitant about coming straight back into their old job. As managers who are engaging managers, there's an awful lot of listening needs to take place. Relatedness. People need to know who they can turn to. We're talking about confidential helplines, something you from larger organisations might have employee assistance programmes, you might have helplines. If not, think about how you can set some sort of confidential space up where people can have someone to talk to in confidence to share how they're feeling. And this leads on to the fairness point at the bottom there about choose a buddy, somebody you can trust. People need a space if they feel things have been unfair or are unfair to express that and to process it and to work it through. It's the sort of thing we do as coaches sometimes when people are changing roles in an organisation and they need a secure space to talk to somebody about that. See how you can provide that within your own workplace. So SCARF model will give you the we'll give you the link for a short video at the end of the day, actually fronted by Dr. David Rock himself. There's an awful lot about the SCARF model on the, whether you Google it or not, and we'd encourage you to explore that and think about how it can help you plan to re-engage both individuals and teams coming back into the workplace. And I'll hand over to Fiona at that point.
Thank you. I think it's a really good technique to think, where am I? Why am I responding? Which one of my buttons is being pressed and how I'm reacting? How can I respond instead? But also, what is it for that person they've just had a really crunchy phone call with them? Where was it that they were struggling? What was their wobbly bits that I need to be aware of, and actually find out more and discover more about what's happening in their whole life, rather than just that one dimension I'm seeing on screen or speaking to on screen.
I think also, Fiona, I think it can be quite a useful, I don't know whether aid memoir is the right term or not, but if you're having a conversation with somebody, perhaps take some time when you've put the phone down or you've finished the Zoom call or whatever, and just reflect on that conversation and think, were there any aspects or words or phrases or emotions in that conversation that might give me an insight as to anything that making that person feel threatened at the moment, that's inducing a threat response in them? So were they talking about things that they're uncertain about? Were they talking about a concern about how they're going to re-engage with their colleagues? And just think about, were there any signposts there to that person feeling something of a threat response? And or were there signs of them feeling a reward response that gives an indication as to how we can build on that for re-engagement? Mary, I love that point about mini people impact assessments. I think that's a lovely term. And it's about thinking about how has COVID impacted on this person and how will that inform how best to re-engage them? Lovely term, Mary, thank you.
And I think it's really important around the well-being, the whole mental health, the well-being going forward. There's certainly a lot of emphasis on the importance of mental health, well-being, a whole approach, a holistic approach for businesses to take on. So that's certainly coming through in terms of strategic narrative going forward. There's been a lot of learning from SARS, there's been a lot of learning from banking crisis, and this fear that has been layered on top of stress has really created a huge impact on our workforce, on our whole society, on the whole world. And this isn't just a simple thing for us all to sort of dust down and get back on the bike and pedal on. Yes, some things will return to normal, but this is just a great way of tuning into and even having a conversation. Tell me what's happening. You know, where do you think you fit coming back? What is it you need to be? What do I need to be helping you with to make sure that works for you when you do come back in? So it's a great technique, really great. Thank you, Diane. So we're going to move on now to productivity, and that links with employee engagement. So next slide then, please. I don't think we're getting, oh, there we go. It's obviously, the next slide has gone to sleep, as often happens in technology, which is the joy of us and how we're working nowadays. So productivity is kind of one of these nebulous things. It's a terminology that I think is often used and linked with manufacturing. But the reality is something we sense. I don't know about you, but I can tell if I can describe a day as I've been quite productive or I've not been at all productive. Thank you, Emily. Please don't worry. It's a normal occurrence nowadays, Wi-Fi having a wobbly. So thank you. But productivity, if we look at the actual definition here, which I really liked, it was a BBC quote: greater economic wealth for every hour we work. And remember I said earlier that Scandinavia is really good at this, and they've made a direct correlation with life happiness, which has to include work, life happiness, life satisfaction, and productivity. They've got an absolute correlation there. And they're working less 40 hours, and they're much more productive than us, much more productive than us. But why is productivity really important? Well, certainly even more important nowadays, because productivity, the greater our productivity, the greater our earnings, both business and individual, and therefore the greater contribution to the public purse in terms of taxes. So why wouldn't we be interested in all contributing to productivity in the UK? So productivity, I've been hearing a lot about it, something I've been interested in, and we certainly have in the business for many years. And we run a local employee engagement network, which is now global, thank you to pandemic. If anybody's interested in joining either the People Productivity Network that we run or the local one, then please do let us know. Productivity has been key as a theme for us in both groups. But how do we measure that thing that we sense? Well, there was certainly an executive team that we worked with a couple of years ago. Their productivity increased by 47% by focusing on them and their behaviours and how they were working together. So if we could have a look at the next slide, please, and create that link where productivity, employee engagement and business culture all come into that overall impact on productivity and bottom line impact. So everything that we do in our business is absolutely rooted in the belief that it is our people, your people, who grow our business. Absolutely, bottom line, your people grow your business. Without your people, then, hey, what would be happening in your business? So let's have a look at the definition then of a highly productive culture. So if we think that employee engagement feeds productivity, then your business culture, your company culture can either be the virus for productivity, or it can be the vaccine for productivity. So we focus on that whole culture. So next slide, please. And the definition for the highly productive culture is absolutely rooted in where employees want to be going, where it's about where leaders and managers create that environment, where individuals, the teams and the company thrive and grow. It's no longer about the business thriving and growing. It's no longer about the team thriving and growing. It's about the whole organization, the environment outside of the organization, the environment within the organization. It's that thrive and grow. It's that interest in me as a human being, as a member of your business, and wanting to contribute to and really be part of your success as an employee. Next slide, please. Thank you, Emily. So when we go into businesses, we often find that a lot of organizations are very good at setting expectations about what we do. Yep, our tasks, our actions, but actually the real difference can be made in how people are doing it, and being very clear about what we expect from people in terms of behaviours and attitude. And I think that's one of the great successes of lockdown and home working. There have been very explicit notices or communications coming about what you can do, how important it is to look after yourself, how important it is to take that time with family. So these are becoming much clearer, but actually our managers are not very good at providing that support about behaviours and attitude. And often we find that where it's going wrong, you've got managers trying to cope, spending 80% of their time with 20% of their people who really have got actively disengaged, is the best way to put it. So next slide, please. So how do we achieve peak productivity? Well, there are three components, and these are really important. We're going to share with you a technique to use to bring people back into the workplace, to identify what going forward might look like. And if we're aiming for peak productivity, why wouldn't we? Then we need to be thinking of these three components. And it's a combination of people, processes, and technology. Can I have a click on to the next click, please? Thank you. And that is peak productivity. Peak productivity is achieved with a combination of the three. But I bet that when most of you are planning what happens next, you're focusing on the processes. You're spending and investing money in the technology. But how are you working with your people to understand what it is that is going to work for them going forward? So what we've developed is it could be a team coaching technique. It can be a facilitated technique. It's something you can do yourself. So next slide, please. So looking at this model around people, process, technology. Now those people could be your customers. Remember, don't forget about your customers going forward. What's going to be different for them? But initially, let's focus on this as an employee or even an executive team, a management level, whatever level. You can either work on this individually, or you can work collectively, or you could work holistically on it. And this is a technique that I was using recently online, and I'll share the learning from it. But there are three key questions to ask. What am I doing that's having a positive impact on my productivity? Good question. What am I doing that's having a positive impact? So focusing on the positive. What am I going to bring with me that will increase productivity back in the workplace? What do I need to bring with me? What's worked really well that I want to really, I want to be continuing and will really increase productivity going forward? And what's the one thing we can all commit to collectively grow that highly productive culture? So a team facilitated event, a coached event, or an individual at any level. And then you'll notice there are two questions in the darker color. Those two dark colored questions would take you into the threat response. You will get so much more energy if you focus on the reward response. So the questions in blue are based on the reward response, and that's also referred to appreciative inquiry. So if you want to investigate more about how you bring this positivity into how you move forward, have a look at appreciative inquiry. The other two questions are questions based on the threat response. Some people need to share. They need to share what they're letting go of. And actually, we need to give permission to some people to let go of things. But how often are we asked, well, what do we want to leave behind? Because it's no longer appropriate. Things have changed. What am I leaving behind? So recently, when we did this with a group, some great things came out. So one person said, I've presented to 150 people on Zoom. I'd have never done that in a room. So much easier doing it on Zoom. So how huge an impact is that having? Somebody else was saying, well, we're actually taking time to explain why. We're explaining why things are happening. We make that time to describe and help people understand what's happening. People are declining meetings if they don't think they're adding value. So, hey, do you know what? I can just press the delete button or just not attend. Others are saying that when they get together in a team meeting, it's much more focused, it's much more productive. And here's where we heard the art of the possible. We've had to make this work. We've made it work. We can fix it. We can make things happen. We are coming from a very positive mindset as to we will make this work. Making time, having fun. That certainly I heard a lot of in the first lockdown. I'm not quite so sure it's continued through into the dark winter months, but it was great to hear what Saira's doing in her business. Some people are making sure that they put time in their diary to take breaks. Others are not having meetings. They're having days without meetings. But the downside, so things that people want to leave behind are, there's too many channels. There's just so many ways of communicating. And I don't really have time to think because I'm jumping from one Zoom meeting or one team meeting to another, and somebody can easily grab my diary or grab my attention or distract me from something I'm trying to achieve. I'm not taking time to eat or drink enough. And I've got such a blur of boundaries, I'm finding it really difficult to switch off. My sleeping pattern's ruined, my work-life balance just isn't happening. Home working has been so difficult, real guilt conscience about the children and having to focus on work with them, trying to get my attention. Some are saying it's, you know, we don't use the phone anymore. We actually have to make an appointment to speak to somebody rather than just pick up the phone. The silo working, and there's combined roles happening, so I'm just overwhelmed. I've got far too much on. So these are some of the things that we have heard in using this technique. And you can use different coloured post-it notes depending on the response you want. It's a really good way using a collaboration tool. This one particularly that we were using was Mural. There's lots of other collaboration tools, but really got people involved and identifying, so what's working well? Because there's an awful lot that is working well that can come back into the workplace and build on employee engagement, getting people involved. This is encouraging the employee voice to contribute to what's it going to be like going forward? What's going to work? What can we bring with us to really make this work? Next slide then, please. Emily, thank you. And be aware. We call them culture vultures. Some people have got worse words for them. There are some people who are can be very outspoken, can be very brutal, I suppose, in how they respond. Do you know what? Some of them just need to be heard because they haven't had a voice for such a long time. So please, please do allow time for people to let off steam. Do allow that opportunity for people to vent what's been a challenge for them. If you move into appreciative inquiry, then you will soon move forward, and everybody, and not everybody, but people will join in that positivity to help build the future together. But the culture vulture and culture catalyst, where you have got those outspoken people, the naysayers perhaps, and where they're very influential in their peer group, then involve them, bring them in, get them involved in developing solutions, because they can be as powerful with their peer group by becoming involved, by getting commitment, by becoming committed as a result, by being energized, by being involved, by being included, being listened to. They can be even more influential than perhaps a culture catalyst, who's somebody who's always up there upbeat, pulling people forward. So think about how you involve those loud, outspoken people who really are good and very influential with their peer group, and bring them into what's happening and shape the way forward. Thank you. Next slide. So that technique is available online, and obviously you've got the slides after this, but we'd like to hear from you. Hey, we've done an awful lot of talking. What is it that you will be needing from your employer or your business to increase employee engagement going forward and to achieve productivity at work? How are you going to get that combination, and what does your employer need to be doing to create that for you? So let's hear from you. You can do it anonymously in the Q&A if you want to, or just add it into chat. Let's hear your suggestions about what's needed going forward. Clearly, you've done well in your own productivity currently. So how does that need to continue? What does your employer need to be doing to make sure that continues beyond lockdown, beyond COVID, BC? So we've got 3 comments in chat. Diane, is there anything in there we need to be responding to while people answer our question and contribute to our... You're on mute.
I will learn one day.
We'll all learn, hey.
No, I don't think so at the moment. Just look forward to seeing what people put in the chat in response to this question. Okay, so let's hear from people who are with us. While we do, let's go back to the 4 enablers and identify where we've come from. We've got some hints and tips. We're going to re-energize by going back into the 4 enablers. So next slide, please, while we wait. Thank you. So hints and tips. Without certainty, nobody can guarantee anything nowadays. Clarity is key. That importance of leading as the leader of the business, as the manager, being very clear about what's expected, being very honest that they haven't got the answers, but being very clear about the next week. That clarity is really important, that next month and what's expected of me. How do we upskill our leaders and managers to really engage with, to bring our people through this back into the workplace, whether that workplace back in an office, whether it's back at home, whatever it is, could be a completely different building. Certainly come across other businesses where they are moving because they know they're going to need smaller premises. So they're doing that right now. So how do we upskill and build that courage and confidence for our managers and leaders going forward? And how do we create that frequency? We know that if that employee voice isn't heard,
then we end up with a lot of negativity, a lot of energy being spent elsewhere while people create their own version of reality. So how do you create that frequency and the channels that work? How do you know it's working? And remember, your people do have the solutions. Involve them again, and take action. Listen to them and take action, follow through. Because that clarity, with greater clarity, you get greater contribution from your people, and therefore a greater commitment to you as a business. And certainly that white stuff card is really kept that person's loyalty to their business. They're not looking for a job anywhere else. Maybe a high street potential risk, but they're not looking for a job anywhere else. They feel so loyal, being remembered and being thought of through such difficult times. So, yeah,
I've got something in the chat. I think this is a really good tip. I'm not sure that Mary put it in here as a tip, or perhaps she did, which is around writing down. So Mary's talked to you about her bedtime ritual of writing a ta-da list. I think that means that rather than a to-do list. But the point being really that sometimes if we write things down, it helps us work through what we're really feeling. And I think one of the tips I would give is, if you're re-engaging colleagues, members of staff, think about how you use writing as a way to encourage them to reflect on what's happened and to capture what they'd like to be different, what they'd like to take forward, what they'd like to stop or start going forward. And as individuals also, just take time occasionally to just grab a pen and paper in that old-fashioned way. There's a different sense of connection if we do it with pen and paper, and actually reflect on what's happened in the last 12 months and how you would like it to be in the future. What would you like to stop doing, start doing, do more of, do less of? And do a bit of self-coaching on yourself, or get a friendly colleague to do it with you. But
well, on that note, one of the execs I'm coaching, it's been really tough for execs. I mean, Saira, you shared, you know, those tough days when you sat in front of a screen. Everybody is human. Everybody is human. And one of the execs I'm coaching, she's WhatsApping me every day now with 3 things that she's achieved, because she's lost sight of that positivity and that success, no matter how big or small. She's sending me 3 things a day that she's achieved, and it's really helping lift her. It also helps create that that barrier between the business finishing and her having her evenings. So yeah,
absolutely. So think about how you can use writing and that reflective process to help you celebrate all you've done the last 12 months or all your organisation's done, but also to start planning how to re-engage for whatever the future might look like.
So comment from Mary about an agile plan, absolutely. So if you think about the roadmap that we've had from the government, it's all given us a bit of hope. I know when I'm going to be going to a pub again. Yes, I might have a pint in the garden somewhere. I might be meeting up with 5 friends for a walk. So that excitement that it energizes for us as individuals from our home, absolutely the same goes for your business. What is your roadmap for them coming back? What do you think? What are your thoughts, and how do you get them involved in that? Saira, you wanting to say something?
Yeah, I probably don't have a very exemplary answer on this one, but the approach we've taken is to put it back in our people's hands. So we are starting to open up all of our offices for those people that maybe don't have the most productive working environment at home, so that, you know, if 1 or 2 want to come in, that's fine. And we are leaving it entirely in the hands of the employee. So those who feel comfortable coming in are coming in, those who want to keep working at home are coming home. So it's the one area where, having talked a lot about certainty before, we haven't laid out a roadmap. Actually, we felt that this is something that's so changeable that we might be at risk of sort of doing a Boris, if we can call it that, and keeping on changing our minds if we try to lay something out. But, you know, hopefully it gives people that autonomy, it gives people that ownership and, you know, maturity over their own time. So I think it's a very tricky one for businesses to get right at the moment, because we've probably we're probably 2 or 3 steps away from real visibility over how this is going to end, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah, as we say, there's nothing certain. Mary's made another good comment around diversity inclusion. Absolutely. And what mental health support. So when mental health well-being, apparently pharmacists have advised that there's a lot of us will have a form of PTSD, especially those who've had COVID. Or lost somebody to COVID. So PTSD is huge impact on us. The mental health impact cannot be underestimated. So certainly in wellbeing, I've been reading, we need to think about financial wellbeing, and that's going to be a topic for our local group in June. Emotional wellbeing, we need to be able to support people's emotional wellbeing, their physical wellbeing, their community wellbeing, their community around them, what support community have they got, work and at home, and their leisure well-being. How are we supporting people to have that all-round approach to their well-being? And there is a well-being thought and action group in Engage for Success who are doing a lot of work on this, with a report coming out very soon. So sign up for the newsletter if you want to see that. It should be out in the next week or so. Thank you, Mary. Anything else in chat? That was on the Q&A.
I think that's it at the moment, Fiona.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we've covered everything that we wanted to share. So let's go on to the explore further then, please. I think we've covered them back up again in terms of the organisational integrity is certainly going to have to include that well-being, the mental health aspect. Is going to be bigger than any of us can ever imagine, especially with the PTSD. Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Yes, next slide. There is a logo first, and then that's just the way it came through. So here we go. So the peak productivity technique that I shared, it's online for you to take. There's going to be coaching hub launch, and this is the first time I think that we're going to have an absolute specialist coaching hub in the Birmingham area. Coaching is so important, especially to leaders and senior people right now, to help them through. They have had probably the most exhausting time they are ever going to experience in their whole career, in their whole life. And that support for individuals in key roles, anybody, coaching is very important going forward. It creates that safe space to explore what's important for that person. The Engage for Success weekly newsletter comes out every Monday. Keep up to date with what's happening. The Engage for Success team diagnostic is there for you. The David Rock YouTube and Appreciative Inquiry. So lots for you to follow up on and work through on. And of course, at the back are our contact details. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to go on the email addresses, if you'd like to receive the updates for each of our events, we hold an email list for that, and we'll share them with you as they come around each month. Okay, anything else from Sarah, Diane?
No, just Mary pointing out the importance of how will pets cope when their owners return to work. Good point. I think pets have been something, well, my pet's been something that's kept me amused many a time over the last 12 months.
So thank you, Emily. Thank you to the Chamber and our hosts for hosting us today. Really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us. Over to Emily. Thank you.
No, thank you. There's I think Fiona mentioned contact details. I will share these slides as well as a PDF after the session. I just wanted to essentially say a few thank yous. Obviously, thank you to our headline sponsors who make Growth People possible: Aston University, BMET College, and the University of Birmingham's Work Inclusivity Research Centre. And a huge thank you to yourselves, Fiona, Diane, and Sarah, for taking the time to share your perspectives and all your insights today. We have a few upcoming Growth Through People events: navigating employment support to access new talent, supporting a pipeline of female talent, obviously a particularly topical subject, having had International Women's Day yesterday. We actually have an event coming up on harnessing resilience and mental health and wellbeing with Dr. Philip McCree from BHSF and a case study from Wesleyan. We're talking about the future of workplaces. with University of Birmingham's Business Club, and actually our Chief Strategy Officer from the Chamber, Henrietta Briley, will be on that panel, talking about what, all these offices are currently empty or almost empty. What will the future look like, and that balance of potentially, working from home sometimes, being in the office other times. So that should be really, really interesting. I highly encourage you to book if it sounds like of interest to you. We also, of course, have our Growth People Conference on the 30th of March. We've got a fantastic lineup and we're hugely excited about it at the Chamber. Our two keynote speakers are Baroness Ruby Madredra-Smith, CBE, who is currently President of the British Chambers of Commerce. She was a CEO of a FTSE 250 company, and she's currently a member of the House of Lords. And Jess Phillips MP, who is a local MP for Birmingham Yardley, fairly senior member of the Labour Party and two-time best-selling author. And if you can spare 5 minutes, we hugely appreciate you completing our post-event survey. As I said at the start of the session, it assists our original research into leadership and people management skills in Greater Birmingham and advises our policy work with local and national stakeholders in this area. And I think we can all agree that right now and over the last year, leadership and people management have been challenged in whole new ways, and we're keen to really encapsulate how that's looked and what that means for businesses going forward. So again, thank you so much. Huge thank you, Diane, Fiona and Sarah, for sharing your insights. And I hope to see everyone here at the next upcoming Growth of People events. Thank you.